Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. This is part 2 of the natal moon in the chart and the particular method which I explained in the previous video. So please watch the previous video first to make sense of what I'm about to finish up with. I'm sorry that the video cut out. Alright, so where I left off is that I was suggesting that the moon in your birth chart, second after you were born, will continue to move just like every other planet in the chart. What you need to look for is what is the next major aspect that the moon will actually make to any planet in the chart. Now, the example that I was using was that the moon will make a square to Saturn in that particular chart that I was using as an example in terms of the very next aspect that the moon will make after your birth. The reason that that is important is because, as I was saying, it sets up a blueprint, a very deep, powerful blueprint, psychological and emotional template of the emotional security and structure of your life. So, you know, Saturn is very hard energy. I keep saying that because it is. And again, you know, I will always, flip the coin and also say that Saturn is very powerful. It has its purpose. It helps us create the structure of our life, etc., etc. It helps us achieve. It helps us learn, grow, develop. There's no two ways about that. But what we need to understand about the moon is our security. You know, it's a very vulnerable, soft, sensitive energy. It's subjective, it's internal. It gets triggered, you know, from all sorts of things. Think about when you were born, when you're a tiny little infant, little baby. Now, the primary needs of an infant are what? They're to be fed and nurtured and given safety and security by usually the mother, or it may very well be another caregiver that's there, depending on, you know, people's life circumstances. But essentially, whoever is acting as the mother principal for that infant, the infant is 100% reliant on that mother to feed that baby on all the different levels that it needs to be fed, with food, emotionally, comfort, security, and safety. So if an infant has a mother who abandons the infant, or who neglects the infant, or who abuses the infant, or who is just simply not a maternal type figure and is just does the bare minimum to feed this child so that it basically is sustained from a food level so that the baby continues to grow. But, you know, nurturance is a very big component of what we need as not only as infants but as adults as well. But it begins when we are infants. So if the nurturing principle fails us, then it does set up some inherent themes and patterns that we project and live through in our life experience. So our sense of security can essentially be completely destabilized from a very young age. And if that is the case, it can create a very difficult sense of feeling safe in the world, essentially, because the moon is our safety, okay? And it derives or emerges from our mother. If the mother is absent, whether she's absent emotionally or psychologically or physically, this creates a lot of difficulty for the person moving through in their life. And it shows up in relationships, in how one feels vulnerable and insecure in relationships. They may feel that they're going to be abandoned. There's a great deep sense of insecurity if the moon, the security, the nurturance was not strong to begin with. And then the person obviously has a choice to eventually, through awareness and a lot of inner work, to work through that and heal that, because I'm not suggesting that a person is doomed for the rest of their life. It just depends on how aware one is, how awake one is, and whether they want to consciously work through these things. Because if a person is born into an environment where the mother failed in the nurturing and the safety and security of the child, there is something set up in that situation where the soul has chosen to live that, okay, to experience that. And some people might say, well, why would somebody choose to experience such a harsh introduction to life? Well, there's all sorts of reasons for that, and we can't answer that with just one answer or one response. But the point being that the soul does choose all these different lessons that we go through, and it is our ego that resists them. It is our ego that dislikes them. It is our ego that struggles with them, not the soul, because the soul wants to go through those things. It needs it in order to evolve and develop in terms of what it's trying to evolve and develop through. But that aside, that's another video. Getting back to what I was saying, when you're looking at your chart, have a look at the very next aspect that the moon is going to make to any given planet in your chart. Now, I'll tell you what the most difficult planets are. To me, it's very obvious, and maybe to you, it may not be. You may have a question mark. I'll tell you what the planets are that are difficult, and I'll briefly explain why as well, okay? The most difficult planets aspecting the moon, and this applies to just your moon natally in terms of when you were born, and certainly with this method where I'm saying have a look at the very next aspect the moon will make after your birth. For me, for instance, it happens to be Saturn. Now, in my natal chart, I have moon squaring Saturn, but the orb, the distance, is very wide. It's something like 14, 15 degrees. So in my birth chart, that is not actually an aspect. It's too wide, okay? But what happens is the moment after I'm born, the very next aspect that the moon gets the closest to is Saturn, okay? It's 15 degrees away, but when it gets there, it gets there. So that sets up a template and a theme for me in my life. And, I could spend several hours telling you what that has been about my personal life, but I'm not going to do that. So, Pluto. Let's just start from the inner planets. Mars is a very difficult energy for the moon. Very difficult. If you have a moon square Mars natally, I really feel for you. It's a very difficult aspect. You have to think and remember that the moon is our emotional security, our sense of safeness and security. What is Mars? Mars is about action, conflict, energy. It's pushing out. Moon and Mars are totally opposing different energies. Mars will upset the moon. Okay, that's what it's going to do. It'll give it a lot of energy at different times too, but essentially what it does is it upsets the moon. When we are in an upset state, an emotionally upset state, our moon has been triggered in some kind of way. All right, so Mars, Saturn. Saturn adds a real coldness. The moon is moist, Saturn is cold and dry. The moon needs warmth and security and safety, and Saturn creates separation. So, moon, Saturn, not a good combination. It's a very difficult combination. The person has to work through a lot of emotional stuff. There's abandonment, there's separation, there's loss, there's fear, there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes up with Saturn. The next one is Uranus. Uranus, if it's a soft aspect, and perhaps let me just go back a step and say soft aspects such as trines and sextiles do not have the same meaning as clearly as an opposition, square, or conjunction. So when you're looking at this technique, or when you're looking at the moon in terms of other aspects it has in your chart, the hard aspects, which are the conjunction, square, and opposition, are the most challenging ones to work through. They are the most dynamic as well. So a lot of resolution and a lot of great work and evolution can come through it, but it's hard. It's really not very easy at all. And the moon is destabilized through these planets that I'm actually referring to at the moment. I started with Mars, Saturn, Uranus. Uranus square the moon, or Uranus opposite the moon, or Uranus conjunct the moon is very destabilizing on an emotional level, okay? It sets up a lot of different templates, you know, from when the person was born. There's a lot of different examples. You know, it could mean that the mother was completely erratic, emotionally erratic, unable to give any emotional security and safety to the child, absent, or just really different in her approach as well, which just didn't meet the basic needs of security and safety for the infant growing up. It sets up a lot of different themes and patterns which then run through emotionally in the individual, and how they relate to other human beings emotionally in their relationships and with women, and their sense of safety and security, and how they feel destabilized and why. And obviously when there's certain transits and progressions hitting off this aspect in your chart, say it was Moon Uranus for instance, well, those periods where the Moon Uranus is triggered in your chart through aspects, through transits and progressions and other techniques as well, then it is those times when you're going to experience incredibly, destabilization of security and emotional security. The other difficult one is Neptune. And some people might think, well, why is Neptune difficult? It's difficult because the moon is pre-ego, period. Okay, and the planets I'm talking about here, apart from Mars, are all, they're post-ego. Okay, so they deal with things on a much grander scale that involves much bigger things in life and much bigger aspects of our life as well. And they're energies that are more evolved, whereas the moon is not evolved. The moon is unconscious, it's pre-ego, so it's volatile, it's vulnerable, it's super sensitive, it's insecure. These planets pose a threat to the moon, particularly when they are in a hard aspect to the moon. And the last one, of course, is Pluto. You know, Pluto moon is, I've seen this in some clients that I've done readings for through the years. This is, Moon Pluto is hardcore. It's soul stuff, so it's, you know, it's there for a real purpose, but it's really, really hard for people to work through. Brings up a lot of death, you know, anxiety around death and power struggles and control and obsessive behaviors, and Scorpio energy. So it brings up a lot of that stuff, and near-death experiences when you were born, or maybe the mother had a near-death experience. Moon Pluto, as an infant, you know, tapping into the darker realms. Pluto, you know, rules all the underworld stuff. He was the lord of the underworld, the darker world. So it brings up in our subconscious or unconscious, subconscious, and then, you know, conscious. It brings up all the dark stuff that we would be absolutely terrified by when we're infants. So yeah, there's a lot of I could give hundreds of examples of how this could play out, but what I'm trying to say is that these planets set up a very difficult blueprint and inherent template that threatens the moon, the safety of the moon, the security of the moon. Your security, your safety, your emotional sustenance and safety and security. It is our sense of security, our own emotional sense of security and safety, that gives us either the courage to engage, with life in the world, to achieve the things we want to achieve, or, to feel constantly threatened and insecure by certain things that will trigger us, right? Based on what the moon is aspecting in our chart. Another one is Chiron. Moon Chiron is very, very difficult in terms of a square, conjunction, or opposition. Moon Chiron is, really very, very threatening to the moon. The Chiron destabilizes the moon. It has tremendous potential, for the person to become an incredible healer. I'm not saying that a person is doomed when they have these aspects to the moon, but they are born with some really, really hardcore, heavy patterns and themes and templates that they need to work through. I have one in my own chart. I've had to work through it. It's taken years and years of a lot of work. So, yeah, that's it in a nutshell, essentially. And obviously, when you're looking at the next aspect that the moon will make after your birth, you are taking into consideration all the other aspects that the moon has in your chart as well, because all the other aspects are going to add to this story, clearly. Obviously, the sign that your moon is in, the house that it's in, and you really want to be looking at the fourth house in your chart. What sign is there? What planet rules your fourth house? Where is that planet located? So there's a lot of things you need to be looking at when you're delineating just the moon in your chart. There's a lot to be looking at, but it's incredible in terms of the depth, the insight, the understanding, and the ability that therefore you can subsequently have by understanding how powerful this stuff is in your birth chart, and how you can access it and really work through it from a point of awareness and insight and understanding and consciousness, which is all about the evolution of your soul, isn't it, at the end of the day? Because nobody gave you your birth chart and said, here, there you go, there's your birth chart. You chose it. You, the soul, chose it. You chose to be born, the time you were born, the place you were born in, the family you were born into, and so forth. We all have done that. I think there's a lot of power in understanding that and in knowing that, because immediately that shifts somebody out of victim mentality to a sense of self-empowerment and a sense of consciousness and courage to accept, understand what they need to work through, and then taking the steps towards how they can work through these issues. The moon in a man's chart, aspecting any of these planets that I've pointed to, is really tough when it comes to the sorts of women that he attracts and the relationships that he sets up as a result of any of these planets aspecting the moon, because that would have described the sense of emotional security or lack of it when the man was just a little boy. So that sets up that whole mothering, nurturing, feminine dynamic and principle that a man does project onto his relationships in the woman that he attracts into his life, and usually it's unconscious. So there's a lot of great work that can be done by this, whether you're a man or a woman, because it affects both equally, just obviously in different ways. So I'll leave it there for today, because this is part 2, and I hope this this beautiful little jewel. I consider it to be jewel, absolute gold to know this, because it just gives you so much more to work with and understand about yourself, and perhaps why certain patterns and themes seem to be repetitive in your life, and perhaps why it's been hard to break through them, and what you need to understand about it, and how you can work through that. So thanks again for watching, guys. Thank you to my new subscribers. I really appreciate you as well, and I appreciate my subscribers that have been there for some time. And again, thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for much more to come. I love doing these videos. I love sharing, and I hope you guys are really getting something out of every single video that I make. That's why I'm here. Please contact me for a reading if you wish to have a personal reading, whether it's a birth chart reading, business partnership reading, career path reading, you know, soul path reading, whatever. Looking at planetary current energies that are going on for you at the moment, maybe something you need to understand and work through with more insight and awareness. You know, when we go to somebody else who's a professional, quite apart from being professional in their field, they also have the ability to be extremely detached, because that's the place that they need to stand in when they're looking at you, when they're looking at your chart. In this case, we're talking about astrology. So it can be very useful to have another person's eyes look objectively into your life and your situation and circumstances, and give you a different perspective and different meaning and reasons. So leave that with you, and thank you. Namaste, blessings and love to all. See you soon.